Today we're going to be diving into the world of marketing and perception.
Ooh, fun.
Yeah, and we're going to be guided by the principles from the classic book Positioning, The Battle for Your Mind. So
Classic.
get ready to explore how brands fight for a space in our minds,
hmm
often without us even realizing it.
It's a fascinating topic, especially in today's world where we are constantly bombarded with messages. It's not enough for a brand to simply have a great product or service anymore. They need to create a distinct impression in the consumer's mind.
It's all about perception.
Okay.
I'm already thinking about all those brands I instantly recognize and why they stand out. What is it about them that sticks?
Well, one of the key principles is this idea of owning a space in the mind. Think of it like prime real estate in a bustling city. The brands that get there first, or the ones that create a unique and desirable category, they tend to dominate.
That makes sense. It's like the first coffee shop to open in a new neighborhood.
Yeah.
Everyone knows where to go for their morning caffeine fix.
Exactly. And once a brand establishes that position, it's incredibly difficult to dislodge them. It's like trying to convince everyone to switch to a new coffee shop when they're already comfortable with their routine.
So if a brand isn't first, are they doomed to obscurity?
Not necessarily. There are ways to outmaneuver the competition even if they've already claimed that top spot. One strategy is to focus on a specific niche or subcategory where you can be the leader.
Okay, so like specializing in a particular type of coffee or creating a unique atmosphere that appeals to a certain crowd.
Exactly. It's about finding a way to differentiate yourself and carve out your own space in the market. Another strategy is to leverage the power of perception to your advantage.
I'm intrigued. Tell me more about this power of perception.
Well, the truth is, consumers often make decisions based on how they perceive a brand rather than objective reality. Think about those blind taste tests where people often prefer Pepsi over Coke.
Right, I've heard about those.
Yeah.
So even if a product is objectively better, perception can trump reality.
Absolutely. It's all about creating the right mental associations and building a strong, positive image in the consumer's mind. And this is where the idea of positioning comes in.
Okay, so how does a brand effectively position itself?
It starts with understanding your target audience, their needs, their desires, their pain points. Then you need to craft a clear and concise message that communicates how your brand uniquely addresses those needs.
So it's not just about listing features and benefits. It's about tapping into something deeper, something that resonates with your audience on an emotional level.
Precisely. And that message needs to be consistent across all your marketing channels, your advertising, your packaging, your website, even how you interact with customers.
It's like creating a cohesive story that reinforces your brand's position in the market.
Exactly. And that story needs to be simple and memorable. Our brains are bombarded with so much information these days, we tend to tune out anything that's too complex or convoluted.
So it's like that old saying, keep it simple, stupid.
Well, maybe not that blunt, but the idea is right. The brands that win are the ones that can distill their message down to one clear, compelling idea.
Like a catchy slogan or a memorable visual.
Exactly. Think about Nike's Just Do It. It's three simple words, but it perfectly encapsulates their brand ethos: motivation, empowerment, and achieving your goals.
Or Apple's Think Different. It's a call to challenge the status quo, to embrace innovation and creativity. Powerful stuff.
And it works because it taps into something deeper than just selling products. It's about connecting with consumers on a values level, appealing to their aspirations and beliefs.
This is making me think about the importance of a brand's name. Does the name itself play a role in positioning?
Absolutely. A strong brand name should reflect the brand's positioning, be memorable, and evoke the right associations.
Can you give me an example of a brand that nailed this?
Think about Amazon. The name evokes a sense of vastness and abundance, aligning perfectly with their goal of being Earth's biggest bookstore and then expanding to offer virtually everything.
It's like they planted that seed in our minds from the very beginning.
Wow. So we've talked about being first, finding a niche, the power of perception, simplicity, and even brand names. What about the competition? How does a brand position itself against others in the market?
There are some fascinating strategies here. One approach is to directly leverage your competitors, either by differentiating yourself from the leader or highlighting their weaknesses.
Ooh, that sounds juicy. Can you give me an example?
Think about how a new ride-sharing app might position itself against Uber or Lyft. They could emphasize their lower prices, their commitment to sustainability, or even their focus on driver well-being.
So they're highlighting what makes them unique and appealing. especially in comparison to the established players.
Exactly. Another tactic is to subtly reposition the competition, subtly shifting how people perceive them. This could involve highlighting their strengths as potential drawbacks, or framing the entire conversation in a way that benefits your brand.
That's clever. It's like a strategic judo move, using your opponent's strength against them. Precisely. A classic example is the Get a Mac campaign, where Apple humorously positioned PCs as slow, clunky, and prone to viruses, while Macs were presented as sleek, user-friendly, and cool.
That campaign was brilliant. It completely changed the way people thought about Macs. But isn't it risky to directly attack your competition?
It can be. You need to be careful not to come across as negative or desperate. The key is to be subtle and strategic, focusing on highlighting your own strengths, rather than simply bashing the competition.
So it's about finding the right balance between being assertive and being respectful.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that once a perception is formed, it can be very difficult to change. First impressions matter, and those initial associations tend to stick.
So if a brand has a perception problem, is it better to try to change it or to start fresh with a new brand altogether?
That's a tough question. Sometimes a subtle shift in messaging or a focus on different features can help reposition a brand, but in other cases, a complete rebrand might be necessary.
Like when a company wants to distance itself from a negative past or appeal to a new generation of consumers.
Exactly. It's all about making strategic decisions based on your specific goals and the market landscape.
This is all so fascinating. I'm starting to see the world of marketing in a whole new light. It's like a giant chess game with brands constantly maneuvering for position.
It is. And the brands that win are the ones who understand the rules of the game and play strategically. But it's not just about winning. It's about creating genuine value for consumers and building lasting relationships.
It's a great point. It's not enough to just manipulate perceptions. You need to back it up with a great product or service and a commitment to customer satisfaction.
Absolutely. In the long run, authenticity and integrity are what truly build brand loyalty. But that doesn't mean you can ignore the power of positioning. It's a vital tool for cutting through the noise and making your brand stand out in a crowded marketplace.
I'm curious to learn more about how this all plays out in the real world. Can you give me some examples of brands that have successfully used positioning to their advantage?
Of course. Let's dive into some specific case studies and see how these principles have been applied in practice.
Okay, I'm ready to hear some real-world examples. This is where it gets really interesting.
One brand that immediately comes to mind is Volvo. For decades, they've consistently positioned themselves as the safety car.
You're right. When I think of Volvo, I think of safety features and reliability. It's like their name has become synonymous with those qualities.
Exactly. They've hammered that message home through their advertising, their design, and even their sponsorships. They've owned that space in the consumer's mind for a long time.
It's a brilliant strategy. And it makes me wonder, are there any downsides to focusing so intently on a single attribute, like safety?
It's a great question. While focusing on one key differentiator can be incredibly effective, it can also lead to a perception that your brand lacks other desirable qualities.
So you're saying a brand like Volvo might struggle to convince consumers that their cars are also stylish, sporty, or luxurious.
That's a possibility. It's a delicate balance. You want to own a specific space in the mind, but you also don't want to box yourself in too tightly.
That makes sense. It's like being known as the reliable friend in your group. It's a great quality to have, but you also want people to see your other sides, your sense of humor, your adventurous spirit, your intelligence.
That's a great analogy, and it highlights the importance of being aware of how your positioning might evolve over time. As consumer tastes change or as your brand expands into new markets.
So a brand needs to be flexible and adaptable, constantly monitoring how their message is being received and making adjustments as needed.
Exactly. And this brings us to another fascinating aspect of positioning, the impact of the media you choose. The medium itself can shape the message and influence how consumers perceive your brand.
I'm curious to hear more about this. Can you elaborate?
Of course. Think about a luxury brand like Rolex. You're not going to see them advertising on late-night infomercials or plastering their logo all over a discount retailer's website.
Right. That would completely undermine their image of exclusivity and prestige.
Exactly. They're much more likely to be found in high-end magazines, sponsoring prestigious sporting events, or partnering with influential celebrities.
So it's about choosing media channels that align with your brand's positioning and target audience.
Precisely. And this becomes even more critical when you're trying to reach a global audience. What works in one country might fall flat in another due to cultural differences or language nuances.
That's a great point. I've heard horror stories of brands making embarrassing translation mistakes
Yeah.
or using imagery that's considered offensive in certain cultures.
It happens more often than you think, which is why it's so important to involve local experts when you're trying to position your brand in a new market. You need people who understand the cultural sensitivities, the language, and the consumer behavior.
So global positioning is all about finding that balance between maintaining your core brand identity
Yeah.
and adapting to local nuances.
It is. And it's not easy, but there are some brands that do it incredibly well. Think about McDonald's. They've managed to maintain a consistent brand experience around the world while still adapting their menu to local tastes.
You're right, I've traveled to several different countries. And while the McDonald's menu might vary, the core branding and positioning fast, affordable, and convenient remains the same.
Exactly. They found that sweet spot between global consistency and local relevance, and it's a strategy that's paid off handsomely for them.
This is making me think about how the digital landscape has completely transformed the world of marketing and positioning.
Absolutely. The rise of social media, the shift towards mobile, the explosion of online video content, it's created a whole new set of challenges and opportunities for
It
brands.
seems like it's much harder to control your brand's message in the digital age. One viral tweet or negative review can spread like wildfire and damage your reputation in an instant.
That's true. Reputation management has become more critical than ever, but it's not just about damage control. The digital landscape also offers incredible opportunities for building brand awareness, engaging with your audience, and even shaping perceptions.
Can you give me some examples of how brands are leveraging digital platforms for positioning?
Of course, one of the most effective strategies is influencer marketing. By partnering with individuals who have a strong following and credibility in their niche, brands can tap into an existing audience and build trust through social proof.
That makes sense. People are more likely to trust a recommendation from someone they admire than they are a traditional advertisement.
Exactly. And it's not just about big name celebrities. Micro influencers, who may have smaller but highly engaged followings, can be incredibly effective for reaching specific target audiences.
So it's about finding the right influencers who align with your brand's values and resonate with your target customers.
Precisely. Another powerful tool for digital positioning is user generated content. By encouraging customers to share their experiences with your brand, you're creating authentic and relatable content that builds trust and social proof.
That's so smart. It's like word of mouth marketing on steroids.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it can be incredibly effective, especially for younger generations who are more likely to trust their peers than traditional marketing messages.
This is all making me realize that positioning is not just a one-time activity. It's an ongoing process that requires constant attention and adaptation.
You're absolutely right. The brands that thrive are the ones that are constantly monitoring the market,
Yeah.
listening to their customers, and evolving their positioning to stay relevant and engaging.
So it's not enough to just create a great product or service. You need to be constantly thinking about how you're perceived in the marketplace and how you can differentiate yourself from the competition.
Exactly. And that's where the principles of positioning come in. By understanding how the human mind works, how we make decisions, and how we form perceptions, you can craft a strategy that helps your brand stand out, connect with your audience, and achieve lasting success.
This has been an incredibly insightful conversation. I'm starting to see the world of marketing in a whole new light.
I'm glad to hear that. And remember, the principles of positioning apply to more than just brands and products. You can use these same strategies to position yourself in your career, in your relationships, and even in your personal life.
That's a powerful thought. I'm going to have to ponder that one for a while.
Ah.
But before we get too philosophical, I'm curious to hear more about how these positioning strategies have been used to reposition brands or even entire industries. Do you have any examples of those kinds of transformations?
One of the most dramatic transformations I can think of is the repositioning of diamonds.
Diamonds. I'm
Oh,
intrigued.
yeah.
Tell me more.
It's a fascinating story. For centuries, diamonds were a relatively obscure gemstone. They were prized for their hardness and brilliance, but they weren't necessarily seen as a symbol of love and romance.
So how did they become the ultimate symbol of commitment?
It's a fascinating story. In the early 20th century, De Beers, the diamond mining giant, launched a brilliant marketing campaign that completely repositioned diamonds in the consumer's mind.
What did they do?
They cleverly linked diamonds to love, romance, and eternal commitment. They created the iconic slogan, "A diamond is forever," suggesting that a diamond was not just a beautiful gem, but a symbol of enduring love.
That's brilliant. It's such a simple message, but so powerful.
Exactly. They also strategically partnered with Hollywood, placing diamonds on glamorous actresses and using product placement in films to reinforce the association between diamonds and romance.
So they tapped into the power of storytelling and aspiration.
Precisely. And it worked brilliantly. Diamonds became the must-have gift for engagements, weddings, and anniversaries. They went from being a niche luxury item to a mainstream symbol of love and commitment.
It's amazing how a well-crafted marketing campaign can completely transform the perception of a product.
It is. And it highlights the fact that positioning is not just about advertising. It's about creating a whole ecosystem that supports and reinforces your desired message.
So it's about aligning your product, your messaging, your distribution channels, and even your partnerships to tell a cohesive and compelling story.
Exactly. And that brings us to another fascinating aspect of positioning, the idea of leveraging your competitors to your advantage.
We touched on this earlier, but I'm curious to hear more about how this plays out in practice.
One of the most common tactics is to position your brand as the anti to the established leader. This works particularly well when the leader has become complacent or has developed a negative reputation.
Can you give me an example?
Sure. Think about the craft beer movement. For decades, the beer industry was dominated by a few large corporations that produced mass market lagers.
Right. It was all about bland, watery beer
Hmm.
with little variety.
Exactly. Then along came the craft brewers. They positioned themselves as the antithesis to the big guys. They emphasized their small batch brewing, their use of high quality ingredients, and their commitment to flavor and innovation.
So they tapped into a growing consumer desire for something different, something more authentic and flavorful.
Precisely. And it worked brilliantly. Craft beer has exploded in popularity, forcing the big brewers to scramble to catch up.
It's a classic David and Goliath story.
It is, and it shows that even in industries dominated by giants, there's always room for challengers who can effectively position themselves as the alternative.
This is making me think about all the new brands that are popping up online, challenging established players in industries like retail, fashion, and even healthcare.
You're right. The internet has created a level playing field where smaller brands can compete with the big guys. By leveraging the power of digital marketing and social media.
So it's about finding a niche, building a strong online presence, and connecting with your target audience in a meaningful way.
Exactly. And it all starts with understanding the principles of positioning. You need to be clear about who you are, what you stand for, and how you're different from the competition.
This has been such an eye-opening deep dive. I'm starting to see the world through a positioning lens. Everything from the brands I buy to the career choices I make is influenced by these principles of perception and persuasion.
That's the beauty of it. Positioning is not just a marketing concept. It's a way of thinking about the world and understanding how we make decisions.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one key takeaway you hope our listeners walk away with?
I think the most important thing to remember is this. Positioning is not about manipulation or deception. It's about clarity, authenticity, and understanding the needs of your audience.
It's about finding your unique value proposition and communicating it in a way that resonates with the people you want to reach.
Exactly. And it's about constantly evolving and adapting to stay relevant in a world that's constantly changing.
That's a great message to end on. Thanks for joining us on this fascinating exploration of positioning. We hope it's given you some valuable insights to apply in your own life.
It's been a pleasure.
And remember, the battle for your mind is always raging. So be aware of the messages you're consuming and make conscious choices about the brands and ideas you allow to shape your perceptions. Until next time, stay curious and keep those minds sharp.